This podcast episode is brought to you by Coors Light. These days, everything is go, go, go. It's nonstop hustle all the time. Work, friends, family expect you to be on 24/7. Well, sometimes you just need to reach for a Coors Light because it's made to chill. Coors Light is cold lagered, cold filtered, and cold packaged. It's as crisp and refreshing as the Colorado Rockies. It is literally made to chill. Coors Light is the one I choose when I need to unwind. So when you want to hit reset, reach for the beer that's made to chill. Get Coors Light in the new look delivered straight to your door with Drizzly or Instacart. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado.
Welcome back to the Keeping Karlsson Short Shifts Fantasy Hockey Podcast. My name is Ben Burnett. Joining me, as always, Louis Ezekiel. Louis, how are you doing today?
Having an outstanding day. Great to get back into the swing of things with a fun slate of hockey last night. Some things went exactly as I hoped. Some other things, like Tristan Jarry's goalie start, didn't go so hot. But just really great to have it back, to be back in front of the TV, watching some excellent hockey going on.
So interesting that you bring up Jarry right off top, and actually I think it's interesting just in general to talk about goalies as we get going here. My main takeaway from one night of action, and just so everyone knows, we are recording this Thursday afternoon before the Friday night games, or the Thursday night games rather. So if you're listening to this on Friday and something we've said is out of date, that's why. But my main takeaway from night one is that goalies are going to have a very tough time out of the gate here, not only because they're going to be rusty, but because they are going to be affected by rust on the defensive end. I think more than usual.
Yeah, it does seem like it, with some limited time to get to work and gel together, we may see it take a little bit of time before those defensive efforts kind of get their feet underneath themselves. And so it may be scary goalie time up until that point. But again, we're talking about exceedingly small sample sizes here. So I think for the most part, we're not going to be advising that anyone go and throw anyone away yet. Although I know that we've seen some slightly panicked responses so far.
Yeah, I think what I would say is just I'm not changing my mind on anything that I saw on night one. Tristan Jarry, not a guy that I was super into just because we haven't seen him take a stranglehold on that spot. And Casey DeSmith seems like he could at least earn his way into a 1B situation. So in that situation, I haven't really changed my mind. But yeah, just overall, I'm not feeling terribly different, or trying not to feel terribly different about goalies on night two or night three or night four. It's just so early in the season.
Yeah, and I think at this point what we're doing is we're trying to collect data points here. We're not trying to make any broad sweeping generalizations, because we know that if, this game had happened in the middle of the season, we would have said, oh, that sucks. It's a blip on the radar. It's going to hurt your fantasy score for the week, but it's just one thing. Because it's the only thing we have on the board so far, we tend to overreact.
And so on the topic of goaltenders, Patty in the patron Discord group, shouts out to Patty, asked, should I drop Koskinen or should I drop all Canada division goalies? Patty actually raid dropped Mikko Koskinen last night after he allowed, I believe, 5 goals to Vancouver. What do you think, Louis? Are you dropping any Canadian division goalies after the Habs, Leafs, and Oilers and Vancouver combined for seemed like 1 million goals, but I guess it was closer to 16 or 17 in those games?
Well, I think that you knew what you were getting into when you drafted Canadian goalies, right? The whole talk during the lead up to the early season was that Canada is going to be this high scoring division. There's not a whole lot of defense that's being played. What did you see on Wednesday night that defied your expectations about what Canadian goaltending might look like. The only thing that I think stood out to me was that we saw Braden Holtby get the start in Vancouver and get the win. So I would be more concerned as a Demko owner, maybe seeing Holtby really edge into those starts if anyone thought that he was just going to be that reliable veteran backup to the future of the Vancouver program here potentially. I'm more concerned about Demko than I am about Koskinen. Koskinen gave me sort of what I expected we would see in goal for Edmonton.
So I was actually buying Holtby in the offseason just because I felt like his opportunity to bounce back was high enough, and we haven't seen it from Demko beyond a incredible stretch in Vegas. He obviously has had some good looks in Vancouver the last year or so, but I just thought that this might be a nice bounce back opportunity for Holtby. And again, after game one, I'm not declaring victory here, but it just felt like an okay start for Holtby. That's what we'll say in net in Vancouver. For Koskinen, though, I would say I'm, again, not panicking. The main reason I'm not panicking, there's no competition for Mikko Koskinen. I don't see Mike Smith as a guy who's going to usurp him. And so Mikko Koskinen, if you're counting on him for rate stats, that might not be a good plan. But overall, if you need starts, he is going to probably get starts and wins in this Canadian division. I mean, they might be 6-5 wins, but if a win is a win, then I'm still holding on to Koskinen in a few spots. So one more goaltender piece of information that we have right now that's a little bit interesting, I would say, is Carter Hutton is going to start in net for Buffalo over Linus Ullmark, the guy who we all figured was the incumbent here, coming in and going to take over the reins. I know Elon was particularly high on Ullmark heading into this season. Lewis, does it freak you out to see Carter Hutton get that first start?
Well, I'm going to wait until we see the results in that game against Washington. He may well just get shelled, and then we'll be, back to sort of what we more or less expected with getting to see Ullmark out there. It does make me worry a little bit. I do have Ullmark shares, but I'm gonna wait and see. I'm trying to think of him missing this game against Washington as potentially as a break, because like we said, we're going to be seeing our defensemen start to get their legs under them eventually, but probably not here tonight. So it seems like a game where Washington could potentially feast.
Because we're recording this before tonight's game, what result would it take for you to be nervous about your Ullmark shares?
I think it's that big win, right, where he lets in maybe one goal and they get the W. We know that Buffalo is a team that can streak and especially has had a habit of streaking at the start of the season and then fading in later times. And Hutton in the past has taken advantage of that, where he's been seen as the guy who is, backstopping them to these victories. So that's what would be of concern to me. The other outcomes, I think, are all going to sort of come out in the wash. But, I did pick him up as someone I hoped could be a volume starter. So, yeah, I'm a little nervous right now. But, I'm all about the Caps tonight.
I think, again, as I've been saying, it's too early in the season to get your hopes too high or too low based on one night of results. Definitely as an Ullmark owner, I would be looking for Hutton to get shelled here. But, just don't get too high, don't get too low. I know it's a short season, but this is still week one. Linus Ullmark still has an opportunity to be a volume starter. So if you're in a deeper league, do not panic drop just because of one night of goalie starts. Lewis, we're going to move further on into the show, and we're going to talk about a couple forwards now. And let's start in Vancouver as a bit of a transition here from our last segment. Niels Hoglander comes into the game. He's playing line 2 with Bo Horvat, and he's on power play 1 with the big guns in Vancouver. And he plays as advertised. Scores a goal, makes a nice play on a earlier goal at even strength. Doesn't get an assist on that one, but easily could have. I watched that game. Hoglander looked pretty good. Are we starting to say he is a must own?
So the big question here, right, is Hoglander going to be an excellent player who's going to get real opportunities moving forward, or is he going to be kind of a flash in the pan up until they get JT Miller back and he's going to move back down the lineup? I do think that second line had some nice chemistry. It reminded me, watching them, a little bit like another line that we're going to talk about later in the show in Montreal. So from that side of things, I really like it. I think that Pearson, Horvat, and Hoglander could be a very nice second line. I don't see him holding on to that power play spot once Miller returns, and I think that is going to cause his stock to take a hit. So I'm looking at him as a short-term option. And then if you're in a deep league where a second-line player with limited power play opportunity is still valuable to you, keep him around. But I think in shallower leagues, he's going to be the kind of person who might hit the waiver wire, and then you're picking him up when he's got a good schedule. You know, you're looking at him as a watch list player to plug in when you have the opportunity.
Yeah, I actually think it depends on league depth, right? If you're in a league where a player that you can plug in and he's going to get top power play, you're just like looking for points. I think Hoglander is a really interesting option right now, as long as JT Miller stays out. It's really difficult though, and I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's difficult to foresee a situation in which Hoglander would be able to bump somebody off that super stacked top unit in Vancouver, and I think that limits his season-long upside. However, we're really early in the season. At the very least, he should be on your watch list, but you might not be able to get him in a lot of spots just because the night one hype was very high. And honestly, he looked really good. This isn't a sort of thing where you're like, oh, that's a bit fluky or whatever in the stat sheet.
Yeah, absolutely. So, hold him while you can or grab him if he's still available. But once JT Miller gets back, I think you have to get judicious thinking about how deep your league is and whether he's the kind of guy you can afford to keep around without that power play time.
Well, let's hop over to another team that played last night in Chicago. And I wanted to jump to Chicago next because, Lewis, I know that this player scored a goal last night, but you've been adamant it was a bit fluky. Dylan Strome on that top line in Chicago with Patrick Kane and DeBrincat and top power play. If you're just looking at the box score, you're excited to see the goal, but you were watching that game, eh?
Yeah, so he shot it off Chernak, and it hit Vasilevsky and went in, and we were bummed because it killed a shutout we had going for us in the Fantasy Hockey Trades League, which was unfortunate, but I am holding Strome, so it was nice for me to get those 5 points in cupful. The fact that line got 21 minutes is really good. He's obviously playing with really skilled players. They're not going to play every game against Tampa Bay, but it does seem like they're likely to kind of get caved in on shooting opportunities against a lot of these teams. But, if you can get someone on that first line in Chicago, that's about the limit of who you're going to want to have. And especially Strome might be a good long-term pickup for you because it sounds like Jonathan Taves is now on long-term injured reserve and may even be questionable to come back in the season.
Yeah, I don't hold a lot of hope for Taves. Obviously, that could change with any sort of a news drop. But for now, I maintain disinterest in Johnny Taves. Dylan Strome, though, yeah, it may have been a fluky goal. But to me, the most interesting thing on that box sheet is the time on ice. 21-plus minutes is crazy. And if you're getting somebody playing 20 minutes with Patrick Kane in a night, then they need to be rostered in every league. I'm not saying that you necessarily have a player on your team that must get dropped for him, but there's probably a team with a worse bench than yours who should be rostering Dylan Strome right now. And I would say the fact that he played 90% of the power play along with the defenseman, Adam Boqvist, is quite interesting there. I'm not enamored with the results, but they were playing against Tampa. So for now, I think I'm as interested in Strome and Boqvist as I was before. I'd like to see Boqvist do a little bit more on the peripheral side of things, but that just might not be his game this year.
It's nice to get some confirmation that Strome is at least going to be, sticking on that line. So again, we're collecting our data points, and that's a nice one to see is good line mates and a lot of ice time. You were talking about having that one team in your league that's got a weak enough bench. One thing I love to do is if there's a really exciting player and I can't maybe afford to pick that person up because I don't have the person to drop, look for that team that doesn't do so well in your league and maybe give them a little nudge to pick them up rather than, the second place team that finishes behind you and is always nipping at your heels. I love to drop some helpful advice to those teams in my league and just say, hey, this guy's pretty good. You might want to grab him while you still can just to keep him out of the hands of the more competitive teams.
I mean, you say that, but I remember the year that Josh Gordon went crazy in the NFL out of nowhere. He had a 4-game suspension to start the year, and I was drafting with a buddy of mine, and I was just like, yeah, whatever. Like, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. Take Josh Gordon, and that's a pretty good flyer or whatever. And then I came to regret that very deeply. So just be careful. You know, it's the same sort of, that's kind of tempting the same sort of fate as trying to angle yourself into a more advantageous playoff matchup. It's like you could be playing with fire a little bit there.
Great point. Yes, you don't want to upset the monkey's paw.
Let's jump over to another team that has definitely, I would say, the most hyped player after night one. I know that he was the most added among cupful tiers. Joel Farabee and the Philadelphia Flyers. Farabee with a goal and 3 assists. Eric Gustafsson with 2 power play assists. And Kevin Hayes with a goal and an assist popping off the stat sheet in that game. Any strong takes coming out of that Philadelphia game, Lewis? Are you bumping Farabee, Hayes, or Gustafsson higher up your ranks? Is your eyebrow raised? Where are you at? Heat check.
Well, take number one is that the Pittsburgh defense is not where it needs to be if they're going to be competitive this year. That was ugly to watch. Some of their new additions, Cody Ceci is like playing all over the place and not really with any rhyme or reason right now, but maybe he can get that locked down. That's a pretty maybe futile hope. I might be setting myself up for sadness. But talking about the Philadelphia guys, I thought that was really exciting. Again, I don't know how much it changes my view of these fellas. Gustafsson did his damage from the second power play. And I don't know if I have a ton of faith on how repeatable 2 assists a game is going to be if that's the case. Farabee definitely was very exciting there, but he's not going to be popping off for 4 points a game. Certainly in a short term, I think it makes sense to add him, ride the hot streak if you've got some dead weight on your roster, if you're trying to fill in an injury spot. I don't see it certainly being sustainable at this level. I don't really see it being sustainable at a point per game level. But he is a really interesting player. And if you like to pick up the fun guys and, maybe flip them before their streak ends or anything like that, that's always a fine choice. But it doesn't change my opinion a whole lot.
So I'm interested in Joel Farabee mainly because this is game 1, right? And so we don't, as you've mentioned a few times, we are collecting data right here. And it is possible that Joel Farabee is just ready for the spotlight, right? Like he's on that line with Giroux and Kevin Hayes. That is going to be, he's going to get looks on that line, and then nothing to sneeze at getting line 2 power play 1, but it is still, you're taking shots in the pan here. There's no sure thing that's on the waiver wire after one night. So I am not against grabbing Joel Farabee, especially he goes again here on an off night on Friday. I'm not against it. I'm just not counting on him. I'm not dropping a guy I drafted in the 9th or 10th round to make sure that I get in on the Joel Farabee train. We were chatting with Brian and Elon of Keeping Carlson, and they actually backed this as well. I'm going to pull up what Elon sent to us here. He promises that this isn't tier 1 posturing because despite the fact that Farabee is the highest added cupful player last night, he didn't get added in tier 1, which I thought was very interesting. But he says he's not going gaga over Farabee. Power play 2 had a good night, but that's likely not going to be the norm. And Brian said me neither. So definitely Brian and Elon aren't there yet. I, for one, think that Farabee is a very interesting flyer. We did not mention him in our post-draft free agency show the other night. I mentioned Oscar Lindblom, who also had an okay night, especially if you're in leagues with banger stats. But I think that I would take Farabee over Lindblom now, at least. We've seen him start to pop off, and we've also seen Philadelphia play with those power play units. There's no dedicated top unit in Philadelphia, so I think there's upside for Farabee. I'm not going crazy and dropping somebody who is a must hold.
So if we can rate some guys who are not power play 1, line 1, so that leaves Strome off, I think. But out of Farabee, Gustafsson, and Hoglander, thinking about position eligibility too, who do you like first from that list?
Well, I mean, it's got to be Hoglander right now just because of that. He's on that top power play in Vancouver, and that's going to have some value in the short term. Longer term, that's pretty much the toss up there, right? It's too close to call between Hoglander and Farabee after one night, but that is the sort of tier where I'm looking. Those are the sort of guys that If I don't have room on my bench, then they're on my watch list. And if I've got some lower tier guys, like a player that I had because he was in top 6 minutes in training camp was Dylan Dubé, and I would drop him, for example. These are the types of top 6 players that you grabbed in the draft towards the end, but that you don't need to hold on to because they haven't popped off yet. And Farabee, Gustafsson, these are guys who I don't have a problem taking a flyer on. Zach on Twitter asked us, would we drop Duncan Keith for Eric Gustafsson? Duncan Keith obviously playing on power play 2 behind Adam Boqvist right now, and I would prefer Gustafsson on power play 2 in Philadelphia because that's a team that I expect to score way more. Chicago might be the worst team in the league this year.
Yeah, if I'm a Duncan Keith owner, I'm almost always looking for an opportunity to drop him for something more interesting. So, yeah, I'm not opposed to it. And as far as like the Farabee thing and the Hoglander, all I would say is, if you want to win the lottery, you got to buy the scratch tickets, right? So you might as well grab a couple and see who stays strong for you and earns you those points. But like we said, I don't think we're giving up any big assets for these folks quite yet, especially based on this extremely small sample size.
And Gustafsson has that upside, I think, that he could, Provorov is obviously a great player, but I don't think that he's somebody where it's like this offensive genius who needs to be on the top unit in Philadelphia. Right. I think that there is opportunity there for Gustafsson to take some power play 1 minutes.
Yeah, for sure. I could see him replacing Provorov and, them giving Provorov sort of the Charlie Coyle treatment and just get him out there more in all situations, give him some more minutes do his thing. Charlie McAvoy. Yeah, sorry, not Charlie Coyle. Can we look at another second or like a 1A line that was really interesting in Montreal yesterday?
Yeah, please.
All right, so we saw a really exciting line in Montreal in that game between the Habs and the Leafs, which was really exciting and went into overtime and had, lots of complaining about the officials, everything you would want from a hockey game on opening night. But that Suzuki-Anderson Drouin line was really exciting. I guess kind of like a line 1B. They're all kind of like line 1Bs in Montreal. But what did you see from those guys, and how would you compare them to some of the other folks we talked about tonight?
I mean, they looked really good. Like Nick Suzuki, if you drafted him in any league, I am prepared to say that you got a steal. He looked every bit the, first line offensive generator. The interesting thing, you kind of mentioned this in Montreal. The interesting thing with Montreal is they have a line that drives line 1 results, but they don't necessarily put up line 1 offensive numbers. And that's that Deneau line with Tatar and Gallagher. They're an incredible matchup line, but they probably have more of the Bo Horvat line upside than they do the Elias Pettersson upside to kind of draw a comparison between two Canadian teams. And so while I thought that line also looked pretty good last night, the Suzuki Drouin Anderson line really popped off. And I mean, Anderson obviously scored twice. Suzuki made a couple of great plays driving in. I think that line, if you have them, you are going to be very happy with those guys. Obviously, Anderson pops off a little bit more in banger leagues. Suzuki, I think, is going to be the guy who scores the most on that line. And then I think Drouin might end up being what he's been the past few years, which is a bit streakier. I mean, he's not going to put up 2 assists every night. But I have interest in all of them at various levels, depending on the depth of a line. Anderson and Suzuki aren't available in any of my leagues. I do have Drouin in a couple deeper spots, and I'm happy with those shares. I think I like each of them right now as long as they're playing together.
So, yeah, I think you nailed the order of interest. Certainly Suzuki is at the top, and then you've got Josh Anderson, who is going to have a really high floor, and it seems like has the potential to be back to sort of what he was during his really exciting season in Columbus. And, yeah, it's nice to see them kind of get a little bit more scoring line minutes treatment in Montreal, which has a bit of a Columbus reputation of being a place where it's tough to see one line get all that many minutes, but nice that they're seeing a little bit more time than maybe we've expected from Montreal teams past.
Yeah, I honestly think that the upside is there for this line to be offensive, for this line to be the offense of Montreal and to drive that offense. I really like all three of those players this year relative to where they were being drafted. I think for me, the Farabees, the Gustafssons, and we mentioned Hoglander, those guys are in a tier below Dylan Strome for me. And I would say that Suzuki is above Strome, and then Anderson is about in that range, and Drouin is probably a little bit below that group. If I were ranking players that we've talked about tonight.
Yeah, I like that. I think you picked out some good spots for them. Anderson is really interesting to me. I might take Anderson over Strome just because of the security of, knowing that hits and shots are coming. But again, like you said previously, if you're going to play 20 minutes a night with Patrick Kane, it's hard to say no to that either. So maybe they do belong right next to each other.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Dylan Strome is a very empty calorie kind of fantasy performer. He doesn't tend to put up volume shots or hits really at all. So I would agree. I'm Josh Anderson above Dylan Strome, although I don't think that you're going to be getting either of them in most leagues at this point. Just pulling up Josh Anderson's ownership rates right now, and it looks as though he is owned in 55% of leagues. So, if you're in shallower leagues, you might have a shot there, but Nick Suzuki in 58%. I mean, these are ownership rates where if you're playing with people who are trying, they are gone. But if you're in with lower tier fantasy players, you might have a shot. Last team I wanted to talk about, Lewis, St. Louis, which I had not really noticed the Lewis connection here until I just said it.
Well, yeah, I'm an LEW, so I don't feel a lot of camaraderie with St. Louis, so it's okay.
That makes sense. The main takeaway from that team, 2 goals from Oscar Sundqvist, playing in the Hoffman spot on line 2. Hoffman a late scratch due to visa issues last night. He didn't get the start with Robert Thomas and Jaden Schwartz. And instead, Oscar Sundqvist came out and scored 2 goals there. Are you getting hyped up for Oscar Sundqvist?
All that really tells me, I think, is that Hoffman is going to have really nice opportunities when he gets in. I'm pretty sure that he is capable of doing anything that Sundqvist is capable of. I'm not especially interested in grabbing him at this time, and it seems like, this is a visa issue. This isn't a lingering injury. This isn't an illness. Hoffman's going to be back pretty soon, and he should be at full capacity. So a bummer for anyone who has Hoffman, who saw the guy in his spot score a couple times, and they wish they could have had that. But all it shows me is that Hoffman's going to have nice opportunities when he gets back.
Yeah, I was a little disappointed with Robert Thomas's usage. Played under 13 minutes and had no power play time whatsoever. I am kind of watching how that develops, because that is a guy who he put up 2 assists last night. So it might appear that the breakout is nigh, but that they might be a little empty calorie there, and that does concern me. All right, Lewis. Well, that is it from us. We are signing off. But for myself, Ben Burnett, I am out of here. Lewis, why don't you sign us off?
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. We appreciate your downloads. We do have a new Twitter handle that we would like you to follow. We are at ShortShiftsKK on the Twitter machine. So please check us out there. If you haven't already, we've got lots of fantasy takes, some goofy stuff, and updates and news. And of course, you can find all of the episodes will be posted there as well. And until we see you again, please remember, play smart and keep your shifts short.